Sumti, you start reading. Okay?
Yes, I will read.
Not read for a long time.
In its essence, the inner being's knowledge has the same elements as the outer mind's surface knowledge, but there is between them the difference between a half blindness and a greater clarity of consciousness and vision due to a more direct and powerful instrumentation and a better arrangement of the elements of knowledge. Knowledge by identity, on the surface, a vague inherent sense of our self-existence, and a partial identification with our inner movements can here deepen and enlarge itself from that indistinct essential perception and limited sensation to a clear and direct intrinsic awareness of the whole entity within. We can enter into possession of our whole conscious mental being and life being and arrive at a close intimacy of a direct penetrating and enveloping contact with the total movements of our mental and vital energy. We meet clearly and closely and are, but more freely and understandingly, all the becomings of ourself, the whole self-expression of the Purusha on the present levels of our nature. But also there is, or can be, along with this intimacy of knowledge, a detached observation of the actions of the nature by the Purusha, and a great possibility through this double status of knowledge, of a complete control and understanding. All the movements of our surface being can be seen with a complete detachment, but also with a direct sight in the consciousness by which the self-delusions and mistakes of self of the outer consciousness can be dispelled. This is a keener mental vision, a clearer and more accurate mental feeling of our subjective becoming, a vision which at once knows, commands, and controls the whole nature. If the psychic and mental parts in us are strong, the vital comes under mastery and direction to an extent hardly possible to the surface mentality. Even the body and the physical energies can be taken up by the inner mind and will and turned to a more plastic instrumentation of the soul, the psychic being. On the other hand, if the mental and psychic parts are weak and the vital strong and unruly, power is increased by entry into the inner vital, but discrimination and detached vision are deficient. The knowledge, even if increased in force and range, remains turbid, and misleading intelligent self-control may give place to a vast undisciplined impetus or a rigidly disciplined but misguided egoistic action. For the subliminal is still a movement of the knowledge ignorance. It has in it a greater knowledge, but the possibility also of a greater, because more self-affirming ignorance. This is because, though an increased self-knowledge is normal here, it is not at once an integral knowledge. An awareness by direct contact, which is the principal power of the subliminal, is not sufficient for that. For it may be contact with the greater becomings and powers of knowledge, but also with the greater becomings and powers of the ignorance.
Big para. Let's have a look at it, what he's saying. Okay. So again, do one thing to give you the sense of continuity. We will see the previous para's summary so that we know exactly what he's talking about. After 1 week, we forget the context and all. No? So we'll do that. So now, this is what he's saying in the previous para, in my own words. Even then, it does help. I hope. So, this one's okay. Yeah. Now, apart from the superficial outer nature, man has an inner being. We have been discussing this subliminal and the intraconscious. He has an inner being, which consists of a true inner mind, a true inner vital, inner body, and a subtle body, which is a subtle body. When we enter the subliminal intraconscious, we can observe clearly the sources of all our thoughts, emotions, feelings, and actions. We see their origins, their motives, their operative energies. We see what drives us from within, but also what influences us from without. Our surface being is full of confusion on account of clashing forces from within and without. This confusion, disharmony, is because of the disharmony of body, life, and mind. But in the inner being, this disharmony can be cured by the psychic as well as the true inner mind, life, and body. Then a true control and self-guiding, self-building harmony becomes possible even in the outer nature. If you go into a subliminal, the power to create a harmony between mind, life, and body also becomes possible. But if we enter the intraconscious through the vital ego, that's a big problem because you have to cross the three layers. There's a physical layer, there's a vital layer, and there's a mental layer. So if you can get stuck in the vital layer if your ego is sufficiently strong. That's what Srendra is going to discuss. But if we enter the intraconscious through the vital ego, then there's a great danger of larger distorting ignorance instead of a larger knowledge. In other words, how important it is to get rid of the ego. But getting rid of the ego is not easy. Okay. The entry into the subliminal or the intraconscious should be through the mind or the psychic. Then it is safe, not the vital. Okay? The psychic, which ensures safety of passage. The inner being then, no longer veiled, can transform our outer life very significantly. So this is what we said in the previous paragraph. Now we will start reading what we read today. Okay? In its essence, the inner being's knowledge has the same elements as the outer mind's surface knowledge. Essentially, it's the same character, but only knowledge increases. The inner being, as I said, is the intraconscious, when you go deep into yourself, not necessarily the psychic. The psychic is even deeper than the inner mind, inner vital, and the inner physical. In its essence, the inner being's knowledge has the same elements as the outer mind's surface knowledge. But there is between them the difference between a half-blindness and a greater clarity of consciousness and vision due to a more direct and powerful instrumentation and a better arrangement of the elements of nature. In other words, basically the outer mind and the inner mind are essentially the same, but the inner mind, the disharmonies of body, mind, life disappear and you have a greater clarity. He is not telling you that you have the full clarity. Huh? No, because the intraconscious can also be a source of error. Okay? So that you can very clearly, you can see greater clarity of consciousness, not the greatest. The greatest can only go vertically up into the supermind. There it can be greatest, but not here. Far superior to our normal consciousness, but still it is prone, it is capable of error. Okay? But the knowledge is far, far greater than in the outer mind. And vision, so he's telling you clarity of consciousness, vision, he has told you same, essentially same elements. So the elements are essentially that. Logic, vision, clarity of consciousness, all these things are common to both, but it increases like anything in the intraconscious. Due to a more direct and powerful instrumentation and a better arrangement of the elements of knowledge. Knowledge by identity on the surface, we have discussed that. On the surface, how can there be knowledge of identity? When you know your own anger and your own pettiness, that is knowledge by identity. On the surface, a vague inherent sense of our self-existence and a partial identification with our inner movements. So what are the inner movements? Anger, okay, sense of sympathy, kindness for others, not only negative things but also positive things. They are our inner movements. Okay? But also the wrong movements, selfishness, generally hate, all these things, but also love, compassion, all these things also. But you are identified only partially in the outer consciousness, in the normal consciousness. But in the inner, it becomes far, far greater. That's what he's telling us. A partial identification with our inner movements, but can here means in the interconscious, deepen and enlarge itself from that indistinct essential perception and limited sensation to a clear and direct intrinsic awareness of the whole entity within. When you are in the interconscious, you can see the whole being. Where you don't see the whole being at all in the normal consciousness. We can't even distinguish between mind and vital, nor sometimes even with the bodily movements and the bodily and the vital movements. We can't distinguish. But in the interconscious, clear. Everything is very clear. We can enter into possession of our whole conscious mental being and life being and arrive at a close intimacy of direct, penetrating and enveloping contact with the total movements of our mental and vital energy. So if you are, even without going into the psychic, that you will take later, you have gone deep into yourself, in the inner mind, inner vital, inner, and what do you have? You have power to see everything clearly. And also you can control it. What he's saying, we have a close intimacy of direct, penetrating and enveloping. Note the difference. Penetrating into particular points, penetrating, okay? But enveloping totality. So individual movements and also total movements enveloping contact with the total movements of our mental vital energy. So we can see everything clearly. We meet clearly. Okay, what is penetrating and enveloping? So penetrating means, suppose you suddenly one day become angry or a desire comes into the vital, in the outer nature. You can immediately penetrate only that one element, that is penetrating. Concentrating only on one element. But enveloping, you see the total movement of the vital and the mind. There are many thoughts in the mind, you see all of them together. That's an enveloping contact. Very interesting words they uses. Direct penetrating or enveloping contact with the total movements of our mental and vital energy. We meet clearly and closely and are, but more freely and understandingly, all the becomings of ourselves, the whole self-expression of the Purusha on the present levels of our nature. In other words, present levels of our nature and the Purusha, expression of Purusha. Therefore, you see the Manomaya Purusha, you see the Pranamaya Purusha, you even see the Annamaya Purusha. You see the Purusha, you see the consciousness behind the body, behind the vital and behind the mind. That's what he's saying. All with clarity. But also, there is or can be, along with the intimacy of knowledge, a detached observation of the actions of nature by the Purusha. So there is intimacy and also detachment. It's possible in the interconscious. A detached observation of the actions of the nature by the Purusha, and a greater Purusha means consciousness. Your consciousness, mental consciousness in the interconscious can see everything clearly. Greater and a great possibility through this double status of knowledge. Which is the double status of knowledge? Intimacy and observation. They seem to be opposites. When you are intimately connected with something, you can see some sort of identification. But when there is an observation, there is a detachment. Exactly the opposite. One is an ingoing movement and the other is an outgoing movement. The observation is outgoing and the intimacy is ingoing. Okay? So both are possible at the same time. Double status of knowledge itself, of a complete control and understanding. All the movements of the surface being can be seen with a complete detachment, but also with a direct sight in the consciousness by which the self-delusions and mistakes of self of the outer consciousness can be dispelled. So, very interesting. When you are in your normal consciousness, you don't see the mistakes. Okay, you identify yourself with the mistakes and justify them. But when you are in the intraconscious, then there is a possibility of seeing clearly the mistake and even dispelling it, even getting rid of the mistake. Wonderful. If you are in your intraconscious. We have not yet spoken about the psychic, remember. There is a keener mental vision, a clearer and more accurate mental feeling of our subjective becoming. Subjective becoming inside ourselves. Subjective becoming, all the emotions and all the thoughts are subjective becoming. A vision which at once knows, commands, and controls the whole nature. This is the power of the intraconscious. Now, we bring in the psychic. If the psychic and mental parts are strong, are in us strong, or our mental parts in us are strong, the vital comes under mastery and direction to an extent hardly possible on the surface mentality. So, what you can't do when you are in your outer being, you can do when you are in inner being. You can control and even become masters in this. Even the body and the physical energies can be taken up by the inner mind and will and turned into a more plastic instrumentation of the soul, the psychic being. So the entry into the interconscious is very, very necessary. So, on the other hand, if the mental and psychic parts are weak and the vital strong and unruly, power is increased by entry into the inner vital, but discrimination and detached vision are deficient. Okay? That's exactly what happened to Tirupati. Remember, he entered into the interconscious through the vital and he got tremendously. Generally, power is increased. So much power increased in Tirupati that he thought that doesn't need to sleep, doesn't need to eat. But no discrimination and no vision. Okay? So he could not be guided by Sri Aurobindo because he had no discrimination. Sri Aurobindo told him again and again, don't do that, eat normally, sleep normally. He didn't away, he had to be sent away. The knowledge, I'm reading the next phrase, the knowledge, even if increased in force and range, remains turbid, disturbed, unclear, muddy, and misleading. Intelligent self-control may give place to a vast, undisciplined impetus or a rigidly disciplined but misguided egoistic action. See how many possibilities. If your mind is clear, it can become misguided and egoistic if you are rigidly disciplined. But if you are not rigidly disciplined, the vital is muddy, okay, then self-control will disappear and give place to a vast, undisciplined impetus or a rigidly disciplined but misguided egoistic action. There is a very interesting case in Russia. His name was Rasputin. Okay, very powerful man, but typical, what Sri is describing here, fits him perfectly. Okay. He had power, tremendous power, but many, many wrong actions. Rasputin is the name. Okay. So he is a very well-known character in history. Misguided egoistic action. For the subliminal is still a movement of the knowledge ignorance. If you go vertically up, knowledge goes on increasing. But if you go horizontally into your intraconscious, then knowledge increases, but also there is a possibility of distortion and ignorance. It has in it a greater knowledge, but the possibility also of a greater because more self-affirming ignorance. This is because though an increased self-knowledge is normal here means in the intraconscious, it is not at once an integral knowledge. It's only partial knowledge with ignorance a little bit. Ignorance becomes less, but knowledge becomes more. Only if you go through the mind and the psychic. But if you go through the vital, you are in danger. It is not at once an integral knowledge. And awareness by direct contact. Okay, we have to again see what is meant by direct contact. I'm reminding you, we have discussed it before. You are not using your senses. When you are using your senses, it is indirect contact. Because between the known and the knower, or rather to be known and the knower, there are the senses in between them, allowing you to know and see. But in the intraconscious, you don't need to use your gross senses. Subtle senses come into play. Okay, so it is direct contact. So I got a note on direct contact. Yeah, subtle senses, direct contact. Gross senses, indirect contact through manas. Okay, which is the principal power of the subliminal, is not sufficient for that. So it is the interconscious is not sufficient for total knowledge. Only partial knowledge, but much greater knowledge. For it may, by contact with greater becomings and powers of knowledge, but also with greater becomings and powers of the ignorance. So, beautiful description of what the dangers are and what the advantages are of going into the intraconscious. And the psychic is there, even deep inside the intraconscious, even deeper than the inner mind, the inner vital, inner physical. Okay? Because often when you are going out in sleep, we all go out of our body. It's quite common. Okay? And you are going out in your subtle body. You are carrying your inner vital and inner mind also along with you. And then you come back into your body. Unconsciously. But you can do that consciously also. Okay, now we go to the next one. So,
Rangana,
yeah.
can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
I think you said that the entry into the subliminal should be through mind and the psychic. You said that.
Huh.
Oh, I think that's really important. As you take the example of the Rasputin.
Yes.
Can you say like the Rajneesh Osho Rajneesh is such an example too, like Rasputin?
Okay, that's an interesting name. Yeah, you could say that because he had power. You're talking of Osho, right?
Yes, Osho Rajneesh. Yeah.
So Osho also, I think, was of that type. That's why he got into trouble wherever he went. You remember he went into, first he was in India, then he was thrown out because of all his funny ideas. And then he was encouraging sex, actually. And in spiritual life, you can't have that. Okay? You have to have total control over your sexual movements. So he went to America. And when he went to America, there also he got into trouble. And then he came back and he opened an ashram in Pune. It is still there, but he is not there anymore. So yes, he had some inner contact, no doubt about it. And he is the fellow who said that Srivamda's knowledge is mental. He says Srivamda's knowledge is only mental knowledge. Not
He said that. Rajneesh Osho said that.
That's right, Rajneesh.
Oh.
Yes, I think you are right, Suki. But these are very difficult things to say. So, but possibility is there, what you are saying, because it seems to fit the picture that Srivamda is giving. Right. Yeah. Okay, so we go to the next one. And now Archana Di has to read because Jasmine can't read. So Archana Di, if you have text,
Yes.
go ahead.
Yes, but the subliminal being has also a larger direct contact with the world. It is not confined, like the surface mind, to the interpretation of sense images and sense vibrations, supplemented by the mental and vital intuition and the reason. There is indeed an inner sense in the subliminal nature, a subtle sense of vision, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. But these are not confined to the creation of images of things belonging to the physical environment. They can present to the consciousness visual, auditory, tactual, and other images and vibrations of things beyond the restricted range of the physical senses or belonging to other planes or spheres of existence. The inner sense can create or present images, scenes, sounds that are symbolic rather than actual or that represent possibilities of information, suggestions, thoughts, ideas, intentions of other beings, image forms, also of powers or potentialities in universal nature. There is nothing that it cannot image or visualize or turn into sensory formations. It is the subliminal in reality and not the outer mind that possesses the power of telepathy, clairvoyance, second sight, and other supernormal faculties whose occurrence in the surface consciousness is due to openings or rifts in the wall erected by the outer personalities, unseeing labor of individualization and interposed between itself and the inner domain of our being. It should be noted, however, that owing to this complexity, the action of the subliminal sense can be confusing or misleading, especially if it is interpreted by the outer mind, to which the secret of its operations is unknown and its principles of sign construction and symbolic figure languages foreign. A greater inner power of intuition, tact, discrimination is needed to judge and interpret rightly its images and experiences. It is still the fact that they add immensely to our possible scope of knowledge and widen the narrow limits in which our sense bound outer physical consciousness is circumscribed and imprisoned.
Yeah. Okay. So it's getting further. Just 1 second. I lost the page. Yeah. So,
what is the difference between intraconscient and subliminal?
no, there is no difference. It's only 2 words meaning the same thing. And also, since they use the word inner mind, inner vital inner, that also is the same thing. You have an outer coarse layer, which is your body, mind, life, and there is a subtler inner layer, which is the inner mind, inner vital, and the physical, inner physical. Inner physical is only the subtle body. Okay. There is no difference. It's the same. And deeper than that is the psychic being deep inside. Okay. So when the psychic is there, you are safe. But if you are going through the vital, very unsafe. Okay, so I'm reading each sentence. I think we can finish it. Okay, but there are some interesting things need pointing out. But the subliminal being, that means the intraconscious, deep into yourself, not the surface, has also a larger direct contact with the world. So he has spoken about the inner contact, and you know also your inner thoughts and your, so that is a subjective element. Now Shelby is saying, if you are in the intraconscious, you also can understand things in the outer world, larger direct contact with the world outside yourself. When you see people, you will understand much bigger, much better than what you would have understood if you were in your surface consciousness. Larger direct contact means without physical senses with the world. It is not confined, like the surface mind, with the interpretation of sense images and sense vibrations, supplemented by the mental and vital intuition and reason. You remember, when you are using your gross senses, all the senses are collecting data from the physical world. The retina is getting images, the ear is getting vibrations of sound and language, and your nose is getting smells, and all these senses are gathering the data and sending it to the interpreting center in the manas, in the mind. And it is the mind that is interpreting your senses. Okay. So in the intraconscious, there is no images and there is no sense interpretations. You are directly seeing. There is no subtle senses, don't need interpretation. That's what he's saying. Okay. And interpretation, I just remind you again, the newborn baby has not got the capacity to interpret. And that's the reason why, although his eyes are there, his ears are there, his nose is there, tongue is there, he understands nothing of the physical world. Zero. He doesn't even know that that's his own mother. Precisely because the interpretative capacity has not yet been established in the mind. Okay. So that is what is meant by interpretation. But note also, interpretation can be wrong. Okay. That's why we see wrong things and we hear wrong things. Okay. So I come back to the text. There is indeed an inner sense in the subliminal nature, a subtle sense of vision, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. But these are not confined to the creation of images of things belonging to the physical environment. That's exactly what we discussed just now. There is no creation of images. Okay, directly you are seeing things. They can present to the consciousness visual, auditory, tactual, and other images and vibrations of things beyond the restricted range of the physical senses or belonging to other planes or spheres of existence. You can see subtle physical forces, you can see the vital world's movements, you can also see the mental movements. All these things you'll be able to see. Okay? If you go into your intraconscious, all these things are possible. Amal has seen even apsaras, and apsaras belong to a higher plane of consciousness. He told me one day that he had seen apsaras also. So, but that's temporary. As soon as you wake up, you are not in your intraconscious anymore. In your sleep, you can have. Most of us go into the intraconscious, but we don't know that. When we come out, we forget. That's why it's so important to remember one's dreams and note them down. Okay? So, this inner sense can create or present images, scenes, sounds that are symbolic rather than actual, or that represent possibilities in formation, suggestions, thoughts, ideas, intentions of other beings. Image forms also of powers or potentialities in universal nature. In other words, when you are, definitely your psychic is awakened, then you get large, superior spiritual truths through images. And they are very interesting because this is what visions are all about. You see vision which is symbolic. Sometimes you even hear sounds that are symbolic. Okay, so very interesting what is. I'll give you one instance of sound. Image, of course, very clear. You get images which explain to you many things. And the sound also is very interesting. Suppose the barriers, when they've spoken about the barrier between your outer nature and the inner nature, and a barrier between your outer nature and the physical world. But sometimes when these barriers break down, there is a subtle sound that you hear. It's not vague, and it is a subtle sound does come. Okay, so that's what it's saying. Sounds that are symbolic rather than actual, or that represent possibilities in formation. So you know what's going to happen in future. That's also he's saying. Premonitory images and dreams also you can get. Okay. Image forms also of powers or potentialities in universal nature. You can see subtle powers and beings also you can see. There is nothing that it cannot image or visualize or turn into sensory formations. Everything is seen through images and sensory formations. So when you see a vision, it is a sensory formation, but not with the eyes. When you hear sounds, subtle sounds, it is sensory formation. In fact, Sri Aurobindo had also the experience of sensory smell. I'll give you an instance, okay? He says in the, and even touch. I'll give you an instance of touch also. In the in the record of yoga, Sri Aurobindo says that at one day in winter, when all the windows and doors are closed and it is midnight, he is smelling, he is getting the smell of fresh baking bread. The baking bread is a very clear smell. I still remember when we were children, we used to go to dining hall and the smell of fresh bread used to be really very striking. Okay, so so what is not a real smell, it's a subtle smell that is there. So that is smell. But now I'll tell you also tactual. Okay, he's using tactual means skin. So you remember all, he has written a poem called Invitation. Who will come with me? Who will climb with me? Up to the hills and the moorlands we go. So that is called invitation. And he's saying that the wind and the weather beating round me, up to the hills and the moorland I go. Those are the lines. And he had this experience in jail. He says that it is not just a symbolic imagery that I'm using. I could actually feel the subtle wind and the subtle storm hitting me. So that is actually tactual. Okay. So these subtle senses do exist. Sight, of course, everybody knows. Sound also. And sound also is very interesting. Okay. The other day we were discussing in Nara's YouTube session, sounds. And he said that he had heard sounds, and I had to admit that I also had heard once a fantastic symphonic sound. I was dreaming, I was in sleep, and I just couldn't forget the experience. It was huge symphonic, not Indian music, symphony, and it's rising to a crescendo, and with such tremendous musical quality. So that is also sound. All these things do exist. Even the Om is a subtle sound. Huh? So these are sounds. And I gave you an instance of even tactual. So everything is possible. Smell also I gave you an instance. The inner sense can create present images, scenes, sounds that are symbolic rather than actual, or that represent possibilities in formation. Those things which are going to happen also, you get intimations. Suggestions, thoughts, ideas, intentions of other beings. You can see what they are intending to do. Image forms also powers or potentialities in universal nature. There is nothing that it cannot image or visualize or turn into sensory formations. It is the subliminal in reality and not the outer mind that possesses the powers of telepathy, clairvoyance, second sight, and other supernormal faculties whose occurrence in the surface consciousness is due to openings or rifts in the wall erected by the outer personality's unseeing labor of individualization and interposed between itself and the inner domain of our being. I was talking about the wall between the outer nature and the inner nature. That's the wall that he's talking about. So when that wall, there's an opening or a rift, a crack in the wall, then these powers come up. Okay, it's not unusual. You're not spiritually developed, but you have the power. It should be noted. I have 2 minutes. I'll finish the paragraph. It should be noted, however, that owing to this complexity, the action of the subliminal sense can be confusing or misleading, especially if it is interpreted by the outer mind, to which the secret of its operations is unknown and its principles of sign construction and symbolic figure languages foreign. A greater inner power of intuition, tact, discrimination is needed to judge and interpret rightly its images and experiences. It is still the fact that they add immensely to our possible scope of knowledge and widen the narrow limits in which our sense-bound outer physical consciousness is circumscribed and imprisoned. So Going into the interconscious can be highly, highly interesting. And one starts seeing symbolic dreams. And these symbols are, they give you guidance about your own nature. You know what is going to happen also in future. Those things are all revealed to you. Okay? So that's what he said. It's a fantastically interesting topic. Okay? And we can go on talking a long time on it, but we have come to 8:40. So we'll stop here today. Sanki, note down 556. But more important, tomorrow we'll read. More
Yes.
important.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you, Rangada.